So this Shabbat is 25 years since I had to give my very first Devar Torah, not as a bar mitzvah kid. Because I didn't even write that one anyway. Unlike all of you guys that are doing a great job writing your Divrei Torah. But for my bar mitzvah, my rabbi really did it. He had something to say and just used me that way. It's okay. But 25 years ago, I completed my first year of rabbinical school. I end up from Jerusalem back to New York City. I'm working at the time for the Reform movement, still called then the United Union of American Hebrew Congregations, and they had a commission on synagogue affiliation, and I was their intern. And all of these national leaders were there, rabbis and donors and people involved in opening doors to Jewish life. And I, the rabbinic intern, needed to give the Devar Torah, and I didn't really get to do that before. The one in Israel for my first year of rabbinical school, I'm not really counting because it was terrible. But this one I thought was really good. I worked on it for weeks. I prepared a daf Torah, which is like a handout, because when you're in rabbinical school, you try to do everything as much as possible in Hebrew. Right? Because you're trying to be an authentic rabbi wannabe. And here I am talking about a daf Torah, and I call Moses Moshe, I call Abraham Avraham. Like, we're using as little English as possible because I'm studying to be a rabbi, and I thought I knew what I was talking about. There were more traditional Jewish sources in this Devar Torah from 25 years ago than in my rabbinic thesis. I found every source I possibly could in order to say something meaningful. And the people thought I was great. And they didn't know what I was talking about whatsoever, because I was citing all of these old dead rabbis, which is also a band. So the Torah portion is called Ekev. And Moshe, brings all of these Israelites towards the end of their journey. And it's been a long journey. They've made it. And Moses has something important to say to all of these people. Moses wants them to listen to God and follow God's instructions. But Moses also wants to make sure that all of the people know this, that God loves the children of Israel. Okay? God is promising to provide protection for these ancient children of Israel, and that God actually brought them to this land that was promised all the way back to Moses' ancestors hundreds of years before. And Moses is pleading with all of these Israelites to open themselves up to love, God's love. And that doesn't sound like familiar to us so often. We talk, my rabbi never talked about, I feel like I'm ditching on my rabbi. My rabbi growing up, and frankly it's true for a lot of us, if we grew up in the 50s, 60s, 70s, rabbis didn't often talk about God. They talked about what was in the New York Times, but they didn't talk necessarily about spirituality. They talked about identity. They talked about survival. But they didn't necessarily encourage us to grow in a certain way. So I don't remember people in my religious school or in my synagogue experience talking about God loving the people of Israel and other peoples too, to be sure. And that's part of what brought us to the land of Israel. So Moses is pleading with these people, open yourselves up. And he kept saying, don't be stiff-necked, right? Stiff-necked is like locked, you're stubborn. Don't be a stiff-necked people. And they're given God's instructions, on how to actually show that love and reverence for God. And it says in the text, Adonai, your God, is the God of all the gods, great, mighty, awe-inspiring God, who lifts up no face in favor and takes no bribe. So God has no favorite children, takes no bribe, and then it says, providing justice for the orphan, the widow, and for loving the stranger by giving them food and clothing. So you are to love the stranger, for strangers were you in the land of Egypt. We have a memory of being in Egypt where we were beat up pretty bad. We were devastated. And because of that, the text says, love the stranger. We grow up and are told the opposite and to stay away from the stranger. Now, stranger danger is a real thing. I'm not diminishing that. I had great videos for my kids. We talked about those things. Everybody stayed safe. And we're not really talking about strangers here. It's somebody so much more than that. A stranger in the Torah, in Hebrew, is a ger. Comes from lagur, which is like to reside. So a ger is somebody who is not an Israelite, who is living amongst the Israelites. They are amongst the community. But in that ancient world, if you left your tribe, you're at risk. Your very life, everything, your loved ones were all at risk. But if you lived with the Israelites, you weren't. The laws were, we've got your back. We are going to take care of you. So this sojourner, this resident, who's not an Israelite, is deserving of love. Now, love in the Torah isn't like the intimacy that we might think it is in our language. It's more like befriending. Maybe it's like accompanying. Maybe it's a shoulder-to-shoulder kind of a thing. We stand with one another. I don't want to go around hugging all of these people I don't know, especially now. That's just not my thing. And it wasn't theirs either. But to stand shoulder to shoulder, yeah, that I can do. In the book of Exodus, it says you can't beat up a stranger. Let's use the word ger. It's not really the stranger. You can't vex the ger. You can't oppress the ger. Why? You are strangers in the land of Egypt. This is part of our story. This is our narrative. This is our memory. Now, here are some classic old rabbis that I was mocking before. Nachmanides writes in the 13th century, he sees two different arguments. One is a command not to oppress the stranger, which Nachmanides says you can't mistreat somebody who's not from your community. You can't take advantage. It's a very practical law. But then Nachmanides is going to say, you can't oppress the stranger because you know that ger, that person's soul. You know the person's soul. We're supposed to have an experience of empathy. In the 13th century, Nachmanides is saying that. We know what it's like to be vulnerable. And Nachmanides writes this: you know that every stranger feels depressed and is always sighing and crying, and his eyes are directed towards God. Therefore, God will have mercy upon the stranger, just as God showed mercy to you. Nachmanides is teaching us to be empathetic. So I think we get an ultimate message here. Knowing that there are strangers, that they're vulnerable, and that they are among us, knowing that is not enough. It's just not enough. As time passes, from our experience of Egypt, of that memory, we feel farther and farther and farther away from that as a truth. It sort of becomes ancient history, or maybe just a story. So I don't care if it happened or not. I believe it's true, and that it has truth for us and how we take care of one another. The other thing that the Torah does isn't just say, don't beat up the stranger, take care of the ger, make them a resident, part of the community, but now we have to love them too. Good grief. You have to love people you don't even know. That's hard. I don't know about you, but that's hard. But again, the love in the Torah, I think, is about accompanying. It is the shoulder to shoulder. So, can we befriend strangers? Can we reach out to someone we don't know? Can you be present? Can I be present for someone that I'm not familiar with? I want to share something that I think is really our task. Our task is to show love and compassion to anyone who feels far from home. Our task is to open our doors to anyone seeking comfort and companionship and fellowship and friendship, which is why I love this tent with no walls. No walls. It's not just COVID safe. It means you can come in from any direction and find a place in our tent. That's extraordinary. And we don't get that so often. Our task is to see the one who feels like a stranger and may be entering a Jewish community for the very first time or the first time in a really long time. Don't worry, this isn't confession. To come and say, this is okay, and I can be seen here. So we need to open our tents, just like our ancestors did, kind of wide, and make sure that folks can have a seat if they want, and maybe be met and noticed, and eventually even known. That is what the tent is for. So who feels like a stranger today? Who feels sometimes a little bit out of place? Who feels that way maybe in my own family, sometimes in schools, sometimes in synagogues or other houses of worship? Where can we find a way where people can know me? Now, I want to tell you something, and that this won't be a surprise to the people that are hanging out here. I believe in synagogues. I really do. Not just because I need a job. I believe in synagogues. I believe in churches and mosques and other houses of worship. I believe that they can help us find strength and comfort. I believe they can guide us to be our best selves, and I also believe that we've missed the mark plenty. We've missed it, and sometimes didn't notice or didn't know each other's names. But walking in God's ways, if we mean it, means that we listen and try and act godly, be present, find that support. So, you have 90 seconds. Are you ready? You're going to turn to a neighbor, someone you don't know. You don't have to shake anybody's hands. Not everybody's into that yet. That's fine. If you agree, you can, but you're going to turn to a neighbor you don't know, and you're going to say, hi, my name is Fred. You don't have to say Fred. Share your names, introduce yourselves, share where you're from, and maybe what you're doing here. Go. You have 60 more seconds. 60 more seconds. I'm almost done. I'm going to share a paragraph and that's it. 30 seconds. If you finished early, you can meet a second person. You can be nice for 10 more seconds. All right, you did great. Thank you for doing that. Now look, I appreciate what you did because for me, as someone who's kind of an introvert when I'm not rabbiing, I hate when rabbis do this to me. And I have to go and be friendly when I'm not in the mood. So I'm grateful that you are willing to do that for this community and perhaps for one another. I think if we want to stand shoulder to shoulder with people, it means we show up even when we don't know them. You don't have to know a family in order to attend a Shiva Minyan in a home of mourning. It means that you can come and participate, whether it's your house of worship, this house of worship, or any other community activity, and watch out for the people that might be a little bit more on the periphery. Say hi to your friends, but then scout out a little bit and say, invite somebody to come in. We can depend on people's generosity, or we can take ownership over the communities that we want to be citizens in. That takes a lot of shoulder to shoulder and loving a ger, the one who journeys with us. So let's bring that divine presence here by making sure we not only know who's sitting with us, but perhaps alleviating some of that sense that I might be journeying alone in this world.